This is a Town of Washington Historical Society meeting held on Thursday, May 16th in the year 2002. And our topic of discussion tonight is St. Joseph's Catholic Church Cemetery. And David Greenwood, our town and village historian, will lead us through the grounds, and he will tell us stories about the lives of the people and what they did for the Millbrook area. Some of the people that are buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery.
Creating the elements. At this point, I'm not sure what's going to happen. What my plan to do is we'll be walking up to the circle, which is about halfway up to the cemetery. I'm going to be pointing out some of the memorable family associations that are reflected in the tombstones. Now, I don't pretend to know every tombstone in the cemetery, and this is really a cooperative venture, so if you have things you'd like to contribute, please do it. It's important that we all feel a part of it. Cemeteries, to me, are very special places. Growing up, with my background, my family, I spent, at least one evening a week with my dad and my mother in our cemetery, cutting and clipping and tending hedges and putting flowers in and so on. My grandmother, who was half Wappinger Indian and lived to nearly be 100 years old, was very pragmatic about cemeteries and very practical. So I grew up seeing my family's names on the stones. As a matter of fact, my tombstone has my name on it and my birth date already. And ever since I was a young child, that was just part of it. So I have a very different relationship with cemeteries. I also, if you think of my last name, Greenwood, and there's a very famous Greenwood Cemetery. And in the 19th century, the Greenwood was really a park or forest. And Greenwood Cemetery was a place where families would go at outings and have picnics and celebrate the land. So a cemetery really is a park. It's a place to remember all the good that created us, all the families, all the people, all the names. And we're going to be celebrating their lives tonight. So bear with me as we go through the cemetery, because it really is a celebration of a lot of very, very special people. People that we have known collectively, we've had the privilege of knowing as family members, or we've known historically because their legacy lives on in everything that makes our community so special today. So let's begin. When we talk about St. Joseph's and this cemetery, we're really talking about a cemetery that was created in 1869. That was just about the time that the railroad came through the village of Millbrook. So it was a very, very active association. I want to help orient you. Those of you who don't know the community, in the 1860s, a man by the name of Merritt purchased what was the old Haight farm. He knew it. He knew that the railroad was going to come through, and he realized that this was key property. The Haight farm, the boundaries of the Haight farm, actually dovetailed into the Thorn property, for those of you who know Thorndale. And a key point happens to be Fountain Place, which is the road right over here. That was one of the markers for the old Haight farm. And Fountain Place, the top of Fountain Place, you'd think there was a fountain. Well, no. In 1870, they had 2 tennis courts at the top of Fountain Place, and that was a real novelty. Tennis was becoming fashionable. If we look where the church is now, there were 2 families. On this side was a man by the name of Henry Shaw, and Henry Shaw was a blacksmith. And some of you remember, I think, Gus O'Reilly's little shoemaker shop, and also there was not a restaurant, but short order right across the street, place to eat. That was actually Shaw's blacksmith shop originally, and it stood on this side of the road right in front of Mr. Shaw's house. What's strange about the house, I'm an architectural historian, so bear with me for a moment, is that the original roof line, it was a 2-story and gable. And in the 1880s, they took that roof off and added a third story with a mansard. So many people find it odd. If you've ever been in the house, you realize that the first floor ceiling is higher than the second floor ceiling. Well, that's okay. But the third floor ceiling is higher than any of them. That's because it was added. On the other side, there was a family. Both property parcels were owned by the Rorlick family in the 1870s, 1880s. So that's the orientation. Now, in the cemetery, the oldest reference to a burial is actually probably not the person, but a memorial. And it's the Buckley tombstone that you see with the cross at the top. That's 1849, and he died in Ireland. But his wife died here, so it's in memoriam. That's really the oldest. Now, I'm at another wonderful spot. Some of you will remember a couple of names, the Stanton name. Anyone knowing anything about the railroad in our community, Mr. Stanton was the station master for many, many years. And his daughter, I have to tell you this, his daughter Margaret gave the society a number of things for our collection, including the papers that she did in 1918, 1919 at the Thorne building, where she defended the continued use of acetylene and predicted that electricity would never, ever take over the village. The next year, the acetylene factory blew up, by the way, which is a whole other story. And but that's Mr. Stanton, wonderful representative of our community. If we look on the other side, another stone that's very important to us, and I had misplaced it. I spent the last 2 days trying to remember, where did I put this? Where was this? Because in my mind I'd seen it. And it happens to be Keever. And standing here, I couldn't find it. Well, Mr. Keever had the store at the intersection of Church and Franklin, where just behind the store, the Great Fire of 1916 began and burned down his store and half of the village. That was known as Keever's, and some of you may recollect it. We have lots of associations with that store. And as a matter of fact, Bert's mom, Mrs. Velletri, Mary Ratuna Velletri, recalled taking her baby carriage and going down to watch the fire, and her father said, "You can't do that. You've got the baby. You can't do that." And she said, "No, I'm a married woman. I can go down. I can do anything I want." And she took and watched the fire. That was Keever's. Wonderful story. Other names you associate, as we look at stones, they may not be the individual person, but the names are important. Weatheralls actually owned Charlotte's dress shop. Miss Ratuno, Charlotte Ratuno, purchased Weatheralls and made it into her store for, gosh, over 50 years. And you remember Charlotte's in the village. Before Mr. Weatherall had it, it was the Doty House. So depending on your generation, you'll have a different name. But it was listed as a commercial men's hotel. And I thought, what does that mean? Well, that meant it was open to the trade. A lot of businessmen would come by train through the village and stay in that hotel. So they were the people that provided the goods for many of our shops. If you had more money, you'd probably stay at the Millbrook Inn or the Millbrook Hotel. But this was strictly the commercial men's house. Moving along, there are so many names that you'll recognize, so forgive me as I jump over. The next cluster that I find really interesting is Deans, and you can see the Celtic cross. I'll point it out to you. John Dean was the head of the Dean family. His sons actually, a number of them were very important for the community. One son became a priest, and that's listed on the stone, and the Celtic cross is actually in his honor. But the two brothers, Dean's brothers, Buddy Morona's, John Morona's store, actually is the descendant store of the Dean. So that's the Dean family and the cluster for it.
David, can I just mention about Valentine Ricks?
Please. Yes.
Valentine Ricks was a blacksmith here in town, but before then he lived over in Mechanic, which was a little hamlet at that time, where the brick meeting house is. And his house he sold to a black family, Sampson Huff. and they kept it till about 1890 and sold it to John Britton. John Britton was the black man who was brought as a young slave boy during the Civil War up here. And it's still in the Britton family. Peter Britton still owns that house, but it started out in Valentine Rick's hands.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Let's move up a little bit. Some of you can see in the distance there's a very, very white tombstone with a cross on an angle. Well, that amazed me because that's Carrara. For those of you who know Carrara, Carrara is the marble that Michelangelo used. And to find a Carrara tombstone here in Millbrook seems very unusual until you realize that the person that was dedicated to, and let me read this for you, Immacolata Doria, who was the 28-year-old wife of DeSantis, and she dies in 1928. And I'm sure that someone had a connection with Marble Works. To get that stone here, it was so unusual. You wouldn't find that in Poughkeepsie. I'm sure it's a New York connection. And a lot of stone workers were Italian, so somehow through a family connection, that stone was there. Take a look at it because it's absolutely pure. There's no grain in it at all. It's exactly the same stone that Michelangelo would use. Here we have the stone that I mentioned for the oldest date of the cemetery. Daniel Buckley died in Ireland, April 10th, 1849, age 51 years, born in the parish of, and so on. And then Mary Burns died in 1885. So this is the oldest recorded date in the cemetery, although the person is not buried here. It's in memoriam. By the way, the form, an obelisk, became very popular in the 19th century because it's associated with Egypt, and Egypt represented the burial customs, life perpetual. So it's very often used in the context of the cemetery. But what's interesting, what you don't see, if you look at the top of that one, it has a globe. Very typical common one. This one has a cross, and the reason is that one of my favorite popes, Pope Sistus, Sistine Chapel, was being created in the 1490s. And what Sistus did was have the obelisk taken from the Forum, and one was put in front of the new St. Peter's, and also the Pantheon, for those of you who've been in Rome, and he had crosses put on the top of all of them. That's where this is coming from. And the reason, Old Testament, Egypt, New Testament, Christianity, and Christianity dominates the cross. So this is not just an accident that those two are put together. Lots of other wonderful names. Murtaugh, a lot of moving companies and storage names. There's quite an even break between Italian families and Irish families. Let me get my note. I don't want to miss any of them. Donahue. If you can see, we'll move up a little bit. There's a stone with a round pillow on the top. Jeremiah Donahue. Jeremiah Donahue was our first hired policeman in 1898 here in the village, and also very, very active in the acetylene factory, the same one that blew up 20 plus years later. And Mr. Donahue was on the village board. He was a trustee. He helped to resolve a wonderful debate. The village had acetylene, but there was always an argument about when to light it and when not to light it. Because if there's a full moon, the village trustees, being very prudent, would direct him not to light the acetylene because he didn't need it. But everyone would second guess that and argue that he was wasting the village money, but he insisted no, he wanted to keep the streets safe. And that debate, imagine it, went back and forth, when they would be lit and when they wouldn't be lit. And that was one of his jobs too, in addition to being the policeman, to go around and light the acetylene on the street.
Now, is that Catherine Donahue's father?
Yes.
Okay. And it's also Fran McGraw's father.
Wonderful stories, really important person. As we move up, I don't want to lose these now. An interesting one. Part of the architecture, the furniture of the cemetery, obviously is stone and so on. But this is an interesting one. This is a cast patent tombstone that was probably ordered from Sears Roebuck. It's metal. And Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, had those listed so that anywhere in the country you'd be able to order them. Now, some of you know of the houses. We have several houses in the village that were also ordered through the catalog and arrived at the train station and then were assembled. I'm sure that tombstone is actually part of that same tradition. A series that I really love, the oldest tombstone that I've been able to find, and if you find one earlier, let us know, because I'd love to be corrected, but the earliest tombstones are actually right in the cluster by the wall. Do you see a small double one? There's a cross and a small double white one. The family names for these are Cunningham and Cullihan. And Cullihan, the earliest date for burial is January 16th, 1869. And it's a double tombstone. And if you look at them, you realize they're for young children. And this is what's written on it. My son, thou wast mild and lovely, gentle as the summer breeze, pleasant as the air of evening when it blows among the trees. For James Cullihan, age 2 years, 10 months, 12 days, January 1869. And then 2 weeks later, his 4-year-old brother died. And then a year later, the mother at age 23 died. So there's a story there waiting to be told. But those are the oldest tombstones that I've been able to locate. Sentiment on the stones. A lot of them are in Italian for the Italian families, but there are several different nationalities. You can see the Gross tombstone. And I must admit, I don't know German, but one of my friends is a retired German teacher, so I left on his answering machine last night. I said, Martin, help me out and forgive my pronunciation, but what does the Lieber Horret Nimmer Off mean? And he called this morning and said that a literal translation would be love never stops, but poetically love is eternal. So that's what the saying is on it. Some others. Okay, we'll keep moving a little bit. Straight ahead, for those of you who are new to the community or haven't been following the newspapers, a couple of years ago we had an unfortunate incident. A young man actually brought a chainsaw in and cut down a cross that was in this unit, and very disturbed young man. He also did some vandalism in our tribute garden. Eventually it will be repaired, but the cross represented so much to the parishioners of the church and to the community as well, and you'll see the reason. If you turn around, look at the access down, and you do oversee this. And the cross and the section is actually part of Bert's story. I've seen Bert here several times these last few weeks, and Bert actually told me that he helped to build this in memory of his mom and dad in 1990, I think, was the date, if I remember. Okay, a few years back. And this really is very much a memorial to his family, and the Rotunos, of course. But Bert, talk about what you found a few years ago and have been there ever since.
The rosary beads, yeah.
The rosary beads.
They never got taken away.
No?
Never got blown away.
No. A few years ago he arrived and there were three sets of rosary and they've been there ever since. So in all those...
I think they're brought over by the children
From the children?
from the school.
Okay. And they've been there ever since. So that's a nice story in compensation for the cross that was cut down. And the cross will be back here again, and everyone will be celebrating it because of its association. While we stand here, the Ratunos, another family that's a legacy for this village and this community, the Ratuno family, there's so many wonderful names that are friends and dear souls. We've got the Deans, again, we've got the Ratunos, DeFazios. If you look at all the names, Reletris, of course, Safari, you just fan out around this, and they represent everyone in this community is related in one way or another, or patronized the family members. But this is very much the heart of our community. And speaking of the heart, one of my favorite sentiments, if we look straight ahead, you can see the Carazone tombstone. And this is another nice touch. The quote that's on that one is, "Our fortune is our 10 children." And that is the Carazone family. We all know Louis Carazone and the connections with it. My son got a phone call a few days ago from Peter Wing saying, "Tell your dad to call me." And anyone who knows Peter Wing realizes when he's got something focused, you better do it. And he said, "Now, when you get there, make sure everyone knows this." So we have to walk over here. Peter discovered it. I have to remember now exactly which one it is. Give me a moment to make sure I find it. Don't tell Peter I just memorized where it was. We're looking for Carson Robertson, and it's going to be right next to the wall. Robertson. You see? Oh, there it is. Good. Thank you. Thank you. The reason this is so important now, forgive me because I didn't know the name, but Peter very quickly filled me in. Carson Robertson was America's first superstar of country and western music.
Exactly. Yes.
And he ended up being the first to record and document a whole list of important songs. And he even went on tour, even sang in Britain for the royal family. And Pete has collected his music. Pete could not believe that here's this legend of the music industry buried here in Millbrook with the association. So Peter said, "David, the next time you go to a tag sale, whenever you see 78s, look through, because you're going to find it, Carson Robinson." So for me, that was all brand new. So some of you recognize the name.
Others still live in Pleasant Valley,
Mm-hmm.
and I meet them at the village restaurant almost every night I go to eat there.
Oh.
He was on WOR early days. I used to listen to him.
He was on Tex Roy a lot.
Oh.
He's very good friends with Tex Roy.
Oh,
They
okay.
were all a
right,
group.
We
Yeah,
have a
they were
jamboree
always
at his house
together.
every Saturday night.
Oh, really? So,
Dan Murphy married his daughter.
okay.
Yes, that's...
Okay, so this is an association I didn't know, so another part of our local story.
That's Pat Robinson's dad, Pat Murphy's dad?
That's right.
I'll be darned. You know Pat Murphy? That's her father.
Okay. Didn't
She
realize
knows
that.
it.
Have a good time.
Oh, and the last one we're going to walk to, because this is really unusual. And as we go by, you can see the Carazone, closer view, our fortune is our 10 children that I'd mentioned.
Birchie is another store,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's George Berkey's aunt.
oh, okay. Do you see the Birchie one over there?
We're going to be coming to the metal one, but before we do, John Manzi. John Manzi's the one who appointed me village historian. And at the time, I said, John, it shouldn't be me. There are so many people who've grown up here. I'm an off-comer. I've only been here about 15 years. And just like Peter, if you knew John, if he made up his mind about something, you better well follow. He said, David, listen to me. You're the one. And I said, why? He said, well, you know, by and large, politics in the town, they're Republican. But in the village, we're Democrats. And you're a registered Democrat. That's why you're going to be the village historian. I said, okay, John, okay. So that's the truth. That's the real reason.
The latest tombstone.
Excuse me?
The latest tombstone.
No, which is the latest?
Put in this morning.
Right there? Oh, okay.
It's beautiful.
What I wanted to point out, this is very unusual in our village, but if we were in Europe, you'd find them. This is the equivalent of the cast one that you saw. Giorgio Pellegrini, 1913 to 1952, with the fancy work in marker. A lot of European cemeteries have this kind of format. So I suspect it was something that was ordered probably in Italy, brought over and incorporated here. If anyone knows more about the story of it, I'd love to find out, but it's really very unusual. I was surprised to see it.
Would those 3 rings on the bottom be for putting vases of flowers
Yeah.
in?
That's exactly how it would have been used. So very unusual. As you look around, there's so many wonderful stories. What I'd encourage you to do, as we walk back down for the refreshments, take a moment, look at them, talk to each other, point out interesting things that you may see, and share that information. That's really what the cemetery is. This was just my overview, my highlights of the ones that I found interesting. And I don't mean to exclude any of the others, but they're all really very, very special. Yes?
David, I would observe that, as with many American cemeteries, we have overlaying on this cemetery much of the history of our republic. There are down the hill graves of men who fought in the Civil War and all our wars since. And their markers are all over.
Yes, absolutely. The last really 135 years are representative of American history and local history. One thing I should also mention is Cardinal Hayes' home. The Thorne property wraps around this piece, which is part of that Haight farm that I mentioned. And the Thorne family has been very generous. They gave the property for the tribute garden first, and that site, by the way, was in the 1890s, 1892, 1893. The Thornes offered it to the community as the site for the Thorne building, for the school, and it was determined it was too steep, couldn't possibly go there. So 25 years later, the Thorne said, how about a park? And that's how the tribute garden was actually started, to commemorate those who fought in World War I. And in a few weeks we'll be celebrating that at Memorial Day. May traditionally is a time of memorial services, and in a lot of our cemeteries there's a tradition that goes back well over 100 years, and that is to gather at Memorial Days in the cemeteries to remember those dear souls that have gone on before, to tidy it up, and very often to sprinkle flower petals in remembrance of the event. I'm actually at St. Peter's in Lithgow, and that's a service that we've reestablished, and every Memorial Day we're in the cemetery, and we've got recollections of it from the 1880s where they would invariably serve lemonade and gingerbread. So if anyone has nothing to do, Memorial Day, come on over and you'll find out about that cemetery too.
Can I add something? You're talking about
Yes.
the First World War.
Right.
The Second World War came to an end. The Thorne
said, the railroad went out, you know, they sold all the tracks and everything, and the Thorne family got together with the village and said, let's build a village green and make this a representative of the Second World War thing. And that's how the village green got to be built. And that was all done with Thorne labor.
And the Thorne family also gave the property for the school, and what is now Cardinal Hayes' home was built for a Thorne member of the Thorne family, the chancellors, and that also was given. So there's a lot of community relation right around us, and the Thorne family is very much involved with it. Well, let's walk back if you have any questions. Yes.
I was curious about the people, the very early people,
Yes.
1870s and 80s, because the town hadn't grown that much.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose they were mainly arts village. They worked in all the many mills. Were the mills still there then?
Of the day laborers were Irish families, and the earliest stones are all Irish. I went through, as a matter of fact, just to, so this is sort of a random list, not at all extensive, complete. But listen to these. These were all the earliest names on the tombstones. Kelly, Flanagan, Murtaugh, Reardon, Welling, Keever, Weatherall, Macaulay, Dean, Whalen, Stanton, Haight, Murphy, Donahue. Those are all the earliest names. And when you think of it as a Catholic Church, that's making sense, mostly Irish. And then, second generation, you start looking at Belletri, Majacamo, Manzi, Safari, Sataro, Oridi, DeSantis, Carazon. These are all names that are from the 1890s, 1900, 1910, 1920, the second wave. And now as you look through, you'll see a lot of Eastern European names that are coming in. So the history of the cemetery is very much, if you look at the dates, a history of migration patterns, war, and conflict. And that's every cemetery. So let's walk back and enjoy our reception.
Mary Murphy will point out on the way down, to those who are interested, this is Susie Sackett's stone. Apparently about halfway down the hill.
Susie Sackett was a much-loved school teacher for many, many years. Our last month's presentation was on one-room schoolhouses, so she looms large in our legend.
You don't want to have your audience on.
I don't know if this is the one or not. I think there's another one. I mean, it's not this one. No, it's not the one. It's
But I was curious about her parents, that's all.
oh, well, she's with someone else. Anyway,
What are we looking for, Mary? Sackett?
Degnan, D-I-E-G-N, Degnan.
D-I-E-G-N-A.
I'm trying to find her right now. I lost him.
How you doing, Mary? Good to
Hi.
see you.
How are you doing, dear? Yeah, nice to see you. We miss you.
Wow, I miss not being here too.
Yeah.
Good to see you. I'm trying to follow Mary so she gets myself.
Wonderful. Talk to Jenny and give the name, because she's our genealogist.
Here's my aunt and uncle, and it's right here.
Anna Sackett, did you say? Did you say Anna Sackett? No. Okay.
Gee, I saw it now. I could have saw it.
Because when you're looking for something, you'll never see it, won't you?
That's it.
Susan Sackett. It's Susan Sackett.
Susan Sackett. There's an Anna Sackett, but
I'm sure this isn't it. It wasn't here. It was right near here.
huh. Smith. What are you doing? I gotta give you a check tonight too.
Yeah.
I don't see. Well, there's There is an Ann Sackett here, but Anna Sackett, but that's not it. It's Susan Sackett, Mary said. But of course, once you're looking for something, you'll never find it.
Yeah.
I should have come over again. I saw it just, recently. I was looking around for it.
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh, it's right near, where this is my aunt and uncle that brought me up.
Oh, okay.
Here. And I says, right near their plot, so I didn't think anything.
Right, yeah.
Now it can be fun.
Party Henry, Katie, who worked there and knows a lot of things about it. I hope to hear more from him later. Allison, Myron here. Jean, would you like to give us a little report on the gravestone that we hope we can fit in with the deep hollows?
Yes.
Jean Armstrong.
Louise Tompkins, as you know, was a former town historian in 1973 to 84, and as you may also know, she was bedridden with rheumatoid arthritis, but that did not stop her from writing about history for over 40 years in the Round Table and many other publications. And we published a book of her stories, and with the proceeds from that, we have now, and I'm happy to report, it is actually happening at this moment. Her gravestone is being upgraded. The stone is being cleaned and her death date is put in. The cement base is already installed, and then we're going to have a plaque noting that she was town historian and author. And we hope that the day we go over to Deep Hollow, we can stop off at St. Peter's Cemetery and dedicate that. But with the funds from the sale of the book, the profits, we have the money to do that. So I'm real excited about that.
And this would be a good time, since I didn't do it outside, to say thank you to David very much for that. Now we have to get Mary Murphy back here because we couldn't find Mrs. Sackett's stone. She knows, she told me about where it is, and someday I'll come back and take a walk through there.
Sure, I could find it. I didn't understand about coming again.
And now Henry Kane, who seems to be into everything, also was telling us that he was tutored by Mrs. Sackett, and he remembers many things about her. When I said, well, what particular courses was she having to tutor you in? And he said, well, actually, we spent most of our time gossiping. So he probably knows more about her than I'd like to learn. I just want to show you, for those who did not go to Pleasant Valley Grange last month, Pleasant Valley Grange had us over for a wonderful meeting and entertainment, and they gave us a the society, a Community Citizen Award in recognition of outstanding service to this community and mankind. Your dedication and personal involvement are gratefully and sincerely acknowledged by the members of Pleasant Valley Grange number 838. We had a very nice evening with them. Now, Molly?
Yes, sure.
I just wanted to ask you, since Donna's not here, should we be hearing about the school applications in what, next month?
Yes, she called the school and I'm picking them up, I think, on May 30th. They're not being turned back in until the 28th.
Did they hear you or do you want me to repeat high school award. We've been waiting for applications and they will be picked up on the 30th. To be looked at and have someone picked for the high school award. That's really about all I have to say this evening.
I'd like to say that we have a card for our good friend and charter member Edna Tilsley, who the day before her 90th birthday, heaven only knows what she was doing, she fell and she shattered her upper arm. And she's in great deal of pain now, and so she is with her daughter in Connecticut. But there is a card, I think, over on this table that we'd like as many people as possible to sign and send to her, because she wrote it herself.
Why don't I pass it around table to table?
That'd be good.
Anyone else have anything they'd like to bring up this evening? The Society also has a thank you from Kirsten Repelier from the library, thanking us for the work, David, CAC material, and I helped on a library poster. If you go into the new library, you'll see some posters there which they're keeping up, I guess. I don't know for how long. You may not get them back in it. But that was something the society did to help out the library, which they appreciated. Thank
Do you want to announce again when our next meetings are? Because I think, I'm not sure it was all heard outside.
The June meeting, or perhaps it'll be the July meeting, will be the annual tea. We're hoping it will be at the Salanders in Deep Hollow Road. It's where Louise Tompkins lived with her grandparents. We won't know for a while, and when we do, we'll send the flyer out and let you know right away. And I think everyone heard that you do need to be a member. You are welcome to join. You can join tonight by seeing Harold Armstrong, it's right here, or you can join later. Thank you. Thank you for coming.